Video games are a constantly changing medium. Every year, more and more games are released, and it becomes harder for players to choose where to spend their time. For developers, this means that constant innovation in their games is a must. In 2012, for Intelligent Systems, it meant releasing Fire Emblem Awakening. Nowadays, with a series as big as Fire Emblem, it's pretty hard to imagine the franchise struggling to sell copies. But in 2012, that was just the case. Following a string of poor sales, the future of the series was in jeopardy. Given these past financial failures, Nintendo warned Intelligent Systems that if their next game failed to meet sales expectations, that would spell the end of Fire Emblem. With that in mind, Intelligent Systems decided to go all out with their next entry. The game began development as Fire Emblem 2011. In the game's early stages of development, the game was notoriously suggested to take place on Mars. The idea was quickly scrapped, with the game's producer, Hitoshi Yagami, thinking, is that even Fire Emblem? The devs clearly wanted to create the ultimate Fire Emblem experience here, fusing many ideas together, some returning from older games, and some entirely new ones. One theme that the developers really wanted to emphasize was the bonds between units, something that, when playing the final product, is extremely evident. Another thing the developers believed to be essential was to bring in as many new players to the series as possible. With this much riding on Fire Emblem Awakening, the game saw its first release in Japan on April 19th, 2012. Now, initially, there was no overseas release confirmed yet, but at E3 2012, Reggie went up to some journalists and confirmed that Fire Emblem Awakening is indeed getting a Western localization. As it turned out, he wasn't supposed to say that yet, but oops. Given the fact that Nintendo of America registered the domain name FireEmblemAwakening.com a few months prior though, this wasn't super surprising. Finally, on February 4th, 2013 in North America and April 19th, 2013 in Europe, the rest of the world saw the release of Fire Emblem Awakening. And people loved it. The game was universally praised by critics and was immediately lauded as one of the best 3DS games. Even now, Fire Emblem Awakening remains the second highest 3DS game on Metacritic, just behind Ocarina of Time 3D, which, is a remake of Ocarina of Time. In addition to succeeding critically, Awakening was a smash hit financially, going on to sell around 2 million copies, completely shattering sales expectations. So, more than 11 years later, what made Fire Emblem Awakening do so well, both financially and critically? Just how did Intelligent Systems save the Fire Emblem series from the brink of death? What made Fire Emblem Awakening so special? Awakening succeeded for a variety of reasons. One of the big changes to the Fire Emblem formula that developers thought was necessary was the introduction of a casual mode, in which fallen units would return in the next chapter. See, in the older games, when a unit was killed on the battlefield, they would, stay dead. But Awakening gave players the option to completely ignore this previously integral part of the Fire Emblem experience. I know many die-hard fans scoff at this option, but as someone who started off with Awakening, I think it's actually a great way to ease new players into the series. I initially started off on casual mode, but as I got deeper into the series and I gave the older games a shot, I ended up going back to Awakening multiple times on Classic and harder difficulties. Now, besides the new difficulty settings, Awakening also gave us Robin, the customizable avatar unit. There was Chris in New Mystery of the Emblem, but that was a Japan-only remake of a Japan-only Super Famicom game. I know by now some of us are pretty sick of these avatar guys, but in my opinion, Robin was actually handled pretty well. He felt a lot more like an actual character among your army, which is something the later games would struggle with greatly. Another change to the Fire Emblem formula, which both series veterans and newcomers could make use of, was the brand new pair mechanic. With this, units can be paired up to fight together as one, and as a result become much more powerful. This, in my opinion, was actually a pretty cool idea, though it wasn't balanced the best. It also heavily reinforced the game's main theme on bonds between units. In addition to the parry mechanic, Awakening also brought back supports. Now, supports aren't anything new to Fire Emblem, they've been around in the series for quite some time. However, Awakening added far more supports between characters. Awakening wasn't just a great gameplay experience, it also had a fantastic soundtrack. The music was handled by Rei Kondo and Hiroki Morishita, both of whom would continue to work on the Fire Emblem series, contributing to the amazing soundtracks for both Fates and Three Houses. Now, prior to Awakening, at least in my opinion, while the Fire Emblem series did have good music, Awakening is the entry that kicked things into high gear. The soundtrack contains so many memorable tunes with such a large variety and mood, and it really does a brilliant job at setting the atmosphere. As for the art direction, Toshiyuki Kuzakihara was responsible for that front. He wanted someone who had never worked on Fire Emblem before in order to bring new blood into the series. Kuzakihara decided to enlist the help of Yusuke Kozaki for character design and illustration, wanting the game to be something new and powerful. Kuzakihara chose Kozaki as he believed Kozaki would be the best fit for creating a cast of characters with a great deal of variety, and he chose well. Awakening's cast of characters feels so distinct, as everyone has their own unique traits which are expressed visually through the designs. In addition to the fantastic character work, the game also features a very unique visual style that makes Awakening feel timeless in my eyes. The overhead maps are created using 3D models, but they feature 2D character sprites. This makes the game's visual style feel like an HD 2D game before those were even a thing. Combat animations are pretty good as well, though they're nothing compared to the GBA animations. A funny detail about this game that those with keen eyes might have noticed is the lack of feet in character models. Since characters just use things like swords or bows or mostly handheld weaponry, the devs just figured, it's okay if we don't give the character models any feet, which means the characters walk around with stubby joints. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about this game's story. So, all things considered, Awakening is a pretty standard Fire Emblem narrative, but that doesn't mean it's bad. I think it has a lot of strong moments. Awakening's narrative is split into 3 arcs: the Gangrel arc, the Valm arc, and the final arc, the Fell Dragon Grima arc. The first arc is really strong and has some of the best moments in the entire series in my opinion. And the Fell Dragon, or the Grima arc, is also very strong, but it's pretty commonly agreed that the Valm arc, the middle chunk of the game, is definitely a bit weaker than the other 2 parts, and it's easy to see why. It honestly just chugs a bit, which is a shame because there's still a lot of good elements in here. The map design is still pretty fun, there's still a lot of great music, but it does kind of hurt the game's pacing a bit. Still, Awakening's story is more of a vehicle to move characters around from place to place, and it does so with flying colors. I briefly touched on this beforehand, but this game really does have a fantastic cast. Awakening really excelled at writing fun and likable characters. Plus, due to the extensive amount of supports available, players have the option to spend a lot of time with each and every one of Chrome's shepherds. You really get a good feel of everyone. Now, one thing that I've always just truly loved about the Fire Emblem series is the way the games ultimately allow players to write their own story within an already existing story. This is something that happens in most Fire Emblem games, but I had a lot of fun with it, in Awakening especially. Take Donald for instance. He can join you if you complete his paralog and you fulfill his recruitment requirements. But if you find him annoying or you don't see a need for him in your army, you can just bench him for the entire game. Or you can grind him out and even marry him off to one of the ladies in your army, and you'll have turned him into a killing machine by endgame. Fire Emblem gives players lots of freedom and agency. I've replayed this game countless times, and there's still units I haven't used or supports I haven't watched, which means there's always something to come back to. Building your own army is something present in every Fire Emblem game, but in Awakening especially, it's so much fun given how much personality each and every unit has. This, to me, is the true essence of Fire Emblem. Reading developer interviews, you can clearly tell that Intelligent Systems wanted to show the gaming world just what is so special about this series, and in my opinion, I think they succeeded. Beyond Awakening's main game, the devs also included a dozen Spotpass teams, with a total of 120 new units being added. This was an insane amount of extra content, and it was all for free. Every Spotpass team featured a returning character from the previous Fire Emblem game. This meant that you could add a bunch of the previous main lords to your Awakening army, in addition to a bunch of other characters. Now, the Spotpass teams weren't anything crazy on the development front, as both models and maps were reused from the main game, but this was still a really cool addition, and it added to Awakening feeling like a celebration of the franchise and a last hurrah. Plus, in addition to the legacy characters, there were also new paralogs added with the option to recruit characters from the main game that you couldn't recruit normally, like Amarin or Walhart. They didn't really make sense canonically, at all, but they were really cool additions once you've beaten the main game. After Awakening's boom in popularity, the devs decided to release paid DLC for the game, and this is something that I feel is really not talked about enough. In 2013, Nintendo and DLC were a very uncommon occurrence, and Awakening seems to have popularized this trend for the company. Plus, the DLC maps were just really cool. They added a lot of legacy maps from older games where you could fight older armies, and there were also maps for grinding gold and EXP, as well as new side story maps. The legacy maps really felt like Spotpass with an actual budget, which was super nice to see. The DLC is by no means essential to the Awakening experience, but for those who've had their fill of the main game, the DLC allows fans to experience more great content. And now, in 2024, Fire Emblem Awakening remains a fantastic game, still worth experiencing today. If you've made it this far and you haven't tried Awakening yet, I sincerely hope you give the game a try one day.